Hi, everybody, and welcome to DynamicsCon. This is Belinda Allen, and I'm super excited to be here talking about one of my favorite areas of the Power Platform, Power Automate. I'm going to be showing you how to do some approvals inside of Power Automate, and it should be fun. I'm a Microsoft MVP for the data platform, specifically Power BI, and I am all in on the whole digital citizen developer. So that's what I like to call myself, citizen developer. So this should be a good time. So let's go ahead and go through the agenda. And we're going to talk about simple approvals. And we're going to spend most of our time here because we're going to build one from scratch. And then we're going to do a sequential multi-stage approval. And then we're going to talk about parallel approvals. And then we're going to go into Q&A. But we're going to do the bulk of our work today in the simple approval, just so you get the feel. And then that way you'll be able to take and build any kind of approval you want. Knock on wood. We're going to start again, as I mentioned, with the simple approval. So what we're going to look at specifically is a PTO or paid time off request. So I have a list in Sharepoint that manages paid time off. So what would happen if we start from the left and work our way to the right? Someone enters in a request in the Sharepoint list. The Sharepoint list, as soon as that item gets added, it goes and says, we need to get approval. So I'm going to send this approval information to the requester supervisor. The supervisor is then going to accept it or reject it. And then at that point, what's going to happen automatically is the Sharepoint list gets updated with the exception or the rejection, and the requester gets a notification of it. So that's what we're going to build in our session today. So let's go ahead and go to Demo Town. I'm going to go ahead and stop my slide. Forgive me for looking over on the left. That's my second monitor where I'm controlling everything. So it's kind of like central control. So here I am inside of Office 365, and this is that Sharepoint list that I told you about. So you can see I have 3 requests out there right now. And if you look in this middle area, the supervisor approval, one's approved. One has not been approved at all. It's kind of pending there, the default snow. And then we have one approved by Pokey. Sorry, I used both my dogs as my supervisor and my manager. So you'll virtually meet Pokey and Goofy as we go along. So let's go ahead and open up Power Automate. And what I'm going to do first, before we do anything else, is I'm going to go into templates, and I want to show you how many approval templates are out there. I'm simply going to click on approval and look at all these templates that are out there. So chances are you could find what you need by looking in the templates, because there are approvals for all kinds of things. And so this is a great place to start. For example, here's one for Dynamics 365 Business Central for a request approval for a customer. So all kinds of things that you could build. But what we're going to do is go ahead and go straight to create, and we're going to build one out from scratch. And this one is going to be an automated flow. And then once I click on that, it's going to say, hey, what is the flow name? So I'm going to call this simple approval. And then it asks me what kind of trigger I want to use. Now, this happens to be the one I want when an item is created in Sharepoint. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Create. And once this comes up, we could start building out our flow. Now, when you build a flow in Power Automate, you have to have one trigger and you have to have at least one step. So here's our trigger when an item is created. Now, it's a good idea to go ahead and rename each and every step, whether it's a trigger or whether it's an action. So I'm going to click on this ellipsis and I'm going to choose rename. And instead of when an item is created, I'm going to change it to when a PTO request is created. And you'll see why in one of the examples toward the end of the session today, why that's important. So now I'm going to find my Sharepoint list. And it's going to load all my Sharepoint sites. I only have one in this trial environment. And then I'm going to get my list name, the PTO request. And now that I have all of that done, I have the first half of it done, and that is the trigger. So now I'm going to move on to the next step. Now, when a request is entered in by somebody, they have an Office 365 account, so I can get access to their information. So I need to get who they are, information about who they are, so I could find out who their approver would be, who their supervisor is. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to look for the person who entered in the request. So I'm going to come in and do a look for the action for profile. So here's my Office 365 users, and I'm going to choose Get a User Profile. And it's probably right in front of me, Get Manager. Let's see. There it is, Get User Profile. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to rename this step first. And that's a real important thing to note. You need to rename the steps before you do anything. Otherwise, you're going to have to go in and recreate a lot of the work again. So I'm going to call this the Requester Profile. So this information is going to get the information I have stored in my Exchange on the person who entered in this request. So when I click in this field, I can get dynamic content, and here's the dynamic content. And right now it has access to the information from the PTO request. So if I were to scroll down, I could see the requester email. And what I did when I created the list, I created a field called requester email. And so it said, hey, I know this is an employee. This is someone who has an Office 365 account. So I'm going to go ahead and get all the information related to them. So I'm going to get the requester email. I know that's a little weird, but Belinda's a little weird sometimes. So now just simply by doing this, I now can get all of the information stored in Access, which includes my supervisor. So I'm going to go in and now get the information for my supervisor. So I know what their email address is, so I can send them the approval. So once again, I'm going to go and look for Profile. And this time I'm going to find Get Manager. And now it'll get the manager of whoever I populate in this field. So let me rename this to Get Supervisor, because that's what we call them in our company. And now in this field, when I click on it, I get that dynamic list again. And now I could see the requester profile. So now I know whenever I select a field from here, I'm actually getting the requester information. So I'm going to scroll down and find the mail or the email address for the requester. And what that does is then it gives me access to all the information for whoever is set up in Exchange as my supervisor. So that's how that works. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick save here just to protect it. And by the way, you can't save anything in Power Automate until you have at least one action and one trigger. And now I do. So now that I know, hey, a request has been made, I know who made it, I know who approves it for that person. Now I need to set the approval in action. So I'm going to click on New Step again. And in the search, I'm going to type in approval so we can get the approvals option. Now, this is the Office approvals, and I have three options here. I can create an approval, I can wait for an approval, or I could start and wait. And I'm going to choose start and wait. If you have an approval process that runs more than like 30 days, then you're going to want to do a create, and then you're going to want to go back up and then issue a wait later. So in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and choose start and wait because everything should be handled within the 30-day window, which is when approvals pretty much drop off the face of the earth inside of the system. So now I have start and wait for an approval. I could even come in here and rename this from Supervisor. And now I have the approval type. Now there are 4 different kinds of approval types. I can say everyone who gets this approval must accept in order for the request to be approved. Or the first person in this list can get to approve the system, which is what we're going to do now because we're only going to send it to one. And then we have some custom responses that we can set. And a custom response would give you the ability to have approve, reject, and maybe I need to ask somebody. That might be an answer you want to have instead. So I'm going to choose first to respond. And then now I get more fields to fill out. So what is the title of this request? I'm going to go and say a PTO request was created by, and then the name of the requester. So I'm going to say PTO request I, And then I'm going to come back to this dynamic field down here. I'm going to scroll up a little bit. And you can see I have the supervisor section, and I don't want that. So I'm going to keep scrolling down. Actually, let me just type in display name. So I have the supervisor's display name, and I have the requester's display name. So I'm going to get the requester display name. And now in the assign to, I need to populate it with the approver's email address, because it's going to put this in two different places. The first place is over here on the left in Power Automate. Under actions, there is actually an approval area, and the approval will reside in there. So someone could go straight into Power Automate and do their approval or rejection, but it will also send an email to that approver. So I'm going to find the name of the person that, or the email address we want to send this to. So I'm going to click on dynamic content, and now it's just populating all of the fields that happen to be email addresses. So I want to get the supervisor's email. This is why it's so important to rename those steps. So I've got the supervisor's email. And now in the details, I'm going to put in a, let's see, paid time off, PTO request has been entered by, and let me get the name and the full name of the person, who the requester name, right there, display name, kind of like mail merge. For beginning, let me get the start date. So for here, I'm going to go to my Sharepoint list, and I have these three fields: the actual request, the start date, and the end date. So I'm going to get the start date to the end date, and then put a period, do a return, and then type in the request, and then we'll paste in the request. That's all I need to put in for right now. Now, I could also put in a link to the Sharepoint list, and I could actually put some description down, but I think that's enough for right now. So we'll go ahead and click on Save. Now it's going to go out to the approver, and the approver is saying, okay, so now what do I do? And I'm going to say yes or no, and the options are approve or reject. So I need to make an allowance for what happens if they approve it and what happens if they reject it. So I'm going to click on New Step, and under Control, there is this option called Condition. And a condition is kind of like an if statement. So I'm going to put in, if the answer from the approver is approved, then I'm going to go down the yes side. Otherwise, I'll go down the false side. So in the value here, what I could do, I have two ways I could do it. I could either just come and type right away outcome, or I could look for all the responses, which is another way I could do it right here. Now I'm going to do the response way. So I'm going to get all the responses. And then by doing that, once I click over here, I'm going to now say is approve. Oops, that's not the response one I wanted. I wanted the responses. Let's see which one. The response from the approver. That's the one I want. Because you notice immediately what happened is then it encapsulated this condition inside apply to each. This is just in case I happen to have this going to multiple people. So in this case, there only happens to be one, but it's still encapsulated because you never know. So I'm going to open the condition back up, and now I have this all set. So if the response is approved, this is what's going to happen. So in the yes area, I'm going to click on Add to Action. And the first thing I want to do is update Sharepoint. So I'm going to first look for Sharepoint. I'll be doing this a couple different ways so you can see it. And there's a lot of options in Sharepoint. So now I'm going to search for Update Item. And there it is. So now I want to rename this. Everything's renamed, right? Update, I'm going to say Request to Approved. And then now I'll find the site. I'll find the list. And you might be asking, hey, why do I have to key that in again? And that's because inside of Power Automate, we can actually move things from one place to another. So for example, if I approve this, I can delete it or remove it from the Sharepoint list that it's on, the request list, and then move it to an approved list, maybe for the HR. So there are a variety of things you can do inside of your approval. I need to, though, be very specific as to which ID or which record number I am updating inside of SharePoint. And so when I click on this ID field, it takes me to the trigger where I created the request. And it knows what ID to use. There is an internal ID there. So I'm going to go ahead and select on that. And then now I need to populate my fields. Now, these first three fields, request, start date, and end date, are all required fields in SharePoint. So you notice they are required here as well. So I need to populate those. So they all happen to start with PTO. So even though I'm not changing anything, I still have to populate it because that's a requirement of SharePoint. So let me get the end date in. And now I could start populating information about the approval. So the first thing I want is the name of the person who approved it. Now I could get the supervisor name from the profile I got, but just in case the supervisor has reassigned the approval to somebody else, I want to get the name of the person who approved it. So I'm going to look for name, and I could get the name of the approver right there. Then I'm going to change that supervisor approval to yes. And then I'm going to get the date of the response. So there's the date the approval response was sent. And then I want to get any comments that the approver has made. So I'm going to look for comments and enter that in. Now, the rest of it is for sequential approvals. We're not into managers yet. So that's all I'm going to populate for right now. So I have the required fields, which is the site, the list, the ID, the request, the start date and end date. And then I have all of the changes that I'm making to it. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse that up. And then now what I'm going to do is click on add an action. And the action that I want to add now is I want to email the person who did the request so they know that their PTO has been approved. So this time I'm just going to type send an email. And you don't have to actually start with the name of the connector like I did with SharePoint earlier. You could start typing in whatever the action is. And now I get all these options. So I'm going to choose send an email. I do want to point out the send email with options. That's a pretty cool one. That's where you could give the user some options and they have to select one and then you get a response back from them. But we're just doing the send an email for right now. And so I'm going to just come in and rename this, send a approval email. Cool. Neato. Okay, now that I got that done, I'm going to tell it who to send it to. And I want it to go to the approver. So I'll click on the dynamic content list. I'm going to type in mail. I could use the email from the SharePoint list, but instead I'm going to come down to the profile area and get the information right there. And the subject, your PTO request has been approved. And then I'm going to put in the specifics. So let me address the email, give a name. I'm going to put in the first name of the requester, comma, and the following PTO request has been approved. And let me put in the request from the to. So let's type that in. So we'll start here. PTO request. And I did not put a space there. Let me put a space. Otherwise, it might be a little tough to read. From start date to end date. And then now let me put in the approved by, and then I'm going to get the name of that approver. And the name of the approver. And then go to the next line. And then I'm going to put in comments so that in the email I could have the comments. And then finally, I'm going to put regards. And then I would have put in the name of the supervisor. So the email looks like it's signed by the supervisor, even if it was not the supervisor who did the approval. So there's the email response. Now, normally you would come in and do the same thing on the no side. So let me do a quick save first of all. And then I want to show you something that it's still in preview and it has a little bit of weirdness to it. I'm going to just copy these and paste them into No. So I'm going to start with the update request. I'll click on the ellipsis and I'm going to copy it to my clipboard. And then I'm going to do the same with the approval. Now over on the No side, I'm going to come in and click on New Action, and I'm going to go to my clipboard, and I'm going to start with the approval. Come on. Oh, it's not being happy with me. Okay. Yeah, it's in preview, so that's okay. But that's how you would go through and do the rejection. So let me just manually do the rejection again. I'll try one more time. Nope. Okay. That's fine. We'll just do it the long way. So I'm going to do update item. The tongue on my machine is hanging out. So I probably have just like made it go, ah. All right. So I'm just going to leave this update item to save some time. And I'm going to quickly populate this PTO request. And I'm going to put in the identifier. And then I got to put in the required fields. And the start date. All right, and then now the name of the supervisor. And then we're going to leave that set to no, and then the date, and then I'm going to put the comments in. Don't worry, the email will be short and sweet. We might not even send the email just to save a time. Okay, so now I have all of that in. So normally you'd come in and put the email in here, but I'm going to save some time for us and not populate that. I have a completed example that I could show you. So now that I have all that done, I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. That's the approval process. So essentially, we created a request. We have the profile information for the person requesting it, the profile of the supervisor who's doing the approval, and then we send the approval to the supervisor, they approve it, and then when they give us an answer, it goes through the steps below. So let's come back out of here, and what I'm going to do, this is turned on right now, I'm going to go in and create this process. So I'm not going to go in this way. You wouldn't want to give your users or your employees access this way because they have access to entering in information for the supervisor and the manager. So that's not something that you want to do. Let me go ahead and cancel that. Instead, I have built this little PTO Request Power App. Very simple, not very special. It just does the job for us in this particular demo. So as Belinda, I'm logged in as Belinda. I'm about to enter a request as Belinda. I have 3 requests that I've already entered. One of them has been declined. And if I click on that one, I could see, oh, sorry, that's inventory day. That was why it was declined. Oh, and if we look, we could see Pokey Allen, my other dog, that's my manager, is the one who declined it. And then we have Halloween. I wanted to go to a party. That one's been approved. And if I click on it, I could see, I was told to have a good time. And then I have this pending one that I'm still waiting for an answer. And that the visual kind of helps. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the add sign, and I'm going to enter in a PTO request. So I want to, let's see, I want to attend DynamicsCon. Okay, and then I'm going to go in and enter the dates for DynamicsCon, which are September 9th through September 10th. And I could have had this automatically enter in the user who's doing the request, but I'm going to just start typing in my name, and I'm the one who's entering in the request. Click on the submit, and now I can see there it is. It's pending approval. And if I go back to my Sharepoint list and I refresh, there it is in there, and it's basically not been approved or anything done yet. Now, what's happening is if I go back to the flow should start any minute. Sometimes it takes a few seconds for it to run. And one of the things that it'll do first is, the first thing that we're going to see is it's going to send an email to the supervisor, which in this case happens to be Pokey. Now, Pokey is logged in. My incognito email for right here. This is Pokey's email. So we're waiting for Pokey to get an email from the Power Automate. Let me quickly go back over here for a moment. There it is. It's starting to run now. And if I click on that, I could see what's going on. So it's received all the information and it's starting the process of sending the email to the supervisor. So let me come back over here. And here is the request automatically. So you can see a PTO request by Belinda. Paid time off request has been entered by Belinda beginning 9/9/2020 to 9/10/2020. She says she'll learn a lot. Now, I'm going to go ahead and answer this one. I'm going to go ahead and say approve this one. And in the approval process, I'm going to come in and did not mean to do it that way. Cancel. Well, that's fine. It took me to the Power Automate. I could have just entered the response in there, but I clicked on the link instead. And I'm going to say, go and learn. Sounds like a hoot. Don't miss the closing event by John. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and click on confirm. And once we do that, let's skip back over to our Power Automate. Whoops, sounds like Belinda got an email. Let's click on that. And okay, I have to apologize for this. I will show you how this has a workaround in another area. This is my trial account, and I was monkeying around inside of Azure Security, but you could see that the email actually has gone out. It's right there. Belinda just received an error message to it. So we'll go ahead and do the next one, not through here, but through another area. Okay, so let's go ahead and archive that one. But Belinda got a request. So let's go into the request here. I'm going to just do a quick refresh. And now I can see that was approved. And if I click on it, I could see Pokey approved it. He approved it today. And he told me to go and learn. Sounds like a hoot. Don't miss the closing event by John. Nice. Okay, so this time, let me come back in. I thought I had that corrected. I'm going to turn this one off. And this time I have in my flow a simple flow I've created here. I'm going to go ahead and turn this one on. I've been playing around with it. Let's take a look at it first. Dun, dun, dun. So in this one, it looks all the same. The difference is I took the time to populate all this information. Okay, so now let's go back, and hopefully this time I won't get that message. So Belinda's going to go back and she's going to enter in another request. So this request is going to be for Christmas holiday. Okay. So for Christmas holiday, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to say Christmas holiday. And then I'm going to put in a date range. We'll start on that date. And I'm going to cheat a little bit, copy, paste, so my calendar will open in December. And I'm going to go ahead and say to the actually, I'm going to just say through the 25th. And then type in my name. And submit that. Okay. So now that this one has been submitted, let's go back to this request or this flow. And we can see this one is running. And it's basically the same one. So we're down to start and wait for approval. Let's go back to Pokey. And we are waiting. Up there was Pokey's other email request. And it resent it again from my other area. But you can see when you answer it, it automatically populates at its answer. So let me go ahead and just immediately archive both of those because we should get an email any minute for the payroll or for the holiday. So come on, let's go back. And click on that. We're still waiting. Oh, that actually might have been the other run. So let me switch. Sorry about that. Let me just go into flow as or automate action approvals as Pokey, which is what I was going to do anyhow. Oh, so we're waiting for this. Okay, so here we are. I don't know what's going on here. I could approve or reject based on what I see, but instead I'm going to click on the ellipsis, and notice I even have the option to reassign if I want to. So let me see what this request is. I'm going to click on it. Oh, that's the original DynamicsCon one. So let's come back in, and when I turned on that other flow, it ran again. So that's what that one's about. So we'll just go ahead and approve that. Even though it's already been approved once, we'll approve it again. Not a big deal. And then when that finishes, here we go. Here is the holiday request one. All right. So you saw how we can go in and do that. This time I'm going to say reject, reapply for 2 weeks. You deserve it. Okay. Now I'm going to click on submit for that one. And let's go back to, there we go. All right, so let's come back in to Belinda's email. So that was that crazy delivery one. Oh, I guess I'm getting them all that way now, but that's okay. At least we could see the approvals are going through. And again, that has to do with Belinda monkeying around with Azure security. I did something, blocked an IP address. So that was Belinda error. But if we go in to look at our PTO request again, I can now see my Christmas holiday, once I refresh, should come up as rejected. You can see my marching ant, so it's refreshing right now. I don't know why my screen's going slow, but let's do a whole refresh right here. There we go. The holiday date has been rejected. So everything looks good. I could see DynamicsCon has been approved, the holiday has been rejected, and so forth. So that's essentially how these requests work. So let's walk through this list again. So we started with the request in SharePoint, and then here's the SharePoint list that I created. It's very simple and straightforward. Very few things are required. The requester email is required, so I need to know who is requesting it, and then the request itself, the date and the end date are required. Then I have the request in SharePoint updating the approval. And we start by getting the request from SharePoint itself, getting that new item from SharePoint, and then getting the requester profile, and then the supervisor from the requester. And then we send the approval off. And the approval, we're just saying the first person to respond. So if it goes to a couple different people, if you reassign it to 2 or 3 people, then the first one to respond gets it. So they approve it. Once it gets approved, then Power Automate in the flow itself starts going, okay, it sends out this approval request. So here is the approval. So when you approve it, you have the option to enter in a comment or reject it. If you look at the little square around it, you could see there's an up caret to show that that's the one that's selected. If multiple people have received it, and it's already been approved or rejected or responded to, and you open up your email second, you would see something that looks like this. So you know you don't have to do anything. The action's already been taken. In Power Automate, we have 3 places we can approve. So when you get to the approval area under Action pane and you see the approval, you can either approve at the 1 up at the top, approve or reject, at the 2 on the line itself, or you can click on the ellipsis and choose to approve and reject. Then you can enter in a comment here. You can see more detail about the information itself. And then we update the SharePoint list. And when we do that, we have the yes or no, depending on how we're going to update it. Basically, it's the same information. The only difference is in the yes, we change it to yes. The default option on the list was no, that it wasn't approved. So we don't do anything basically there. And then finally, we send an email to the requester themselves, telling them whether or not it's been approved or denied. And those are the steps. They get that email. This is what it would normally look like. I grabbed an older one. Sorry for that. But this is the email that they would get to show that they have that information. And it's very, very, very simple. This is the simple approval. And the approval doesn't have to be vacation request. It could be anything. In this particular case, I have an expense report that I'm looking at, or an expense itself, and I want to get the expense approved. So I'm going to send somebody an actual image. And so this is how I would do that. So let's go ahead. This is what they would get on the email. So we'll take a look at that. Let's go ahead to Demo Town and see this in action. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my flows here. And I'm going to, first of all, before I do anything else, I want to turn off this flow, the simple one. Normally I don't turn them off, but I have other flows that do other things. And if I turn those on, I want to make sure that we're not getting 3 or 4 emails like I did a while ago where I got 2, because I turned on, it was still in play, and I turned on my sample one and kind of monkeyed things up. So I'm going to open up the expense approval, and let me turn this one on. Let's take a look at it and see how this is set up. All right, so the first thing I did for my trigger is I said, I'm going to do a manual trigger. So I'm going to manually send this off. Now, this could be a manual trigger from within my phone itself if I wanted to do that. So if I have a receipt, I could just take a picture, set it up. This one's not done this way, but I could take my phone, take a picture of a receipt, and send it off and get approval for it right away. So I'm just saying, hey, I want an approval, and I want it, it's going to be a file, and then I want to be able to select an image. And then what's going to happen is the approval process starts. So in this case, I hard-coded in the user because I didn't want to deal with the that conditional stuff. So I just hard-coded in my supervisor, Pokey, and the detail just simply said, here's my receipt, please approve. And that's the whole thing. Now, if I open up Show Advanced, then I'm putting in a name of receipt. Doesn't matter what name it is right now, because it could be anything later, just as long as the extension matches what I'm going to be sending. So if I'm always going to be uploading a JPEG file, then I need to make sure I have JPEG as the extension right here. Otherwise, it will not work for me. And then the attachment, hey, it goes back and it says, whatever attachment I selected here is the one I'm going to use. That's the whole approval. And what I'm going to do is just do a test on it and show you how this one gets done. So I'm going to perform the action myself. I'll go ahead and choose Save and Test. And now it's saying, okay, I need to make sure that I have access to approvals, and I do. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And now it's saying, hey, what is the file content? So I'm going to go to Import. And all right, so I selected the receipt file. It just so happens it has the same name, but .jpeg is still there, and I'm going to tell it to run the flow. And so Pokey should be getting an email with that receipt saying, hey, you need to approve this. So let's go back to Pokey for a moment. Sounds like he got it. And here it is. Here's his approval. So here's my receipt. Please approve. And I have a approve or reject again. Now that's a bit small to read. I could download it right there, or I could just simply click on it and see the whole receipt. And this is the receipt. I just blurred out what I spent money on, but here's my receipt. So that looks good. So I'm going to say, go ahead and approve this, and looks good. Can you order more? And if I had a response, or whatever way Pokey or Belinda would be looking for it, she'd be able to see that was indeed the response. So let me go back to as Belinda, and my flow ran successfully. Let me close that out. I'm going to go into the action items, into approvals, and I'm going to go to history. I should have a lot out there. Nope. Nope, because I didn't put myself on the approval for that. Okay, never mind. I kept that one nice and small. So go back to my flows. But that's how you could do an attachment. Very, very simple. You could even take a picture and make a picture, set it up. It could be anything. You can include an attachment in with something else if you want to. So you could get an invoice or a PO Maybe you're in Dynamics Business Central and you have a purchase order and you have an estimate. You can enter in the purchase order information, attach the estimate, and then send it to the appropriate person to go ahead and populate it. Very good. So these are some things that are important for you. First of all, you can have people outside your company manage approvals. What you would do is in your Azure Active Directory, just don't monkey around with the IP stuff like I did. You would set up people as guest users. And there is a link that you could go to. Just do a research on guest users for approvals. And it's called B2B, business to business. And then that way you can set them up and include them as part of your approval process. Then the other thing, I already talked about this a little bit, approvals tend to crash out after 30 days. So if you have an approval that takes more than 30 days, you might want to have a second flow that kind of takes it and runs with it. I also want to point out that on the approvals, there are only two options unless you use the custom options, and that's approve and reject. And then I also want to point out those are case sensitive. So you saw me put in that condition statement that if the outcome is approve or the responses is approve, it was very important that I had uppercase A and then the rest of it all lowercase. And then finally, from Power Automate, from that approval area, you can cancel out an approval. So if you have something outstanding, you can go ahead and cancel it out without it finishing the cycle if you want to. So let's talk briefly about sequential multi-stage approvals. So they kind of work exactly the same way as a simple approval. An employee in step one submits the request. In this case, it's a conference request. It goes to the pre-approver instead of which would be in this case, the supervisor. They make a decision to accept or reject. And if they do, if they say, okay, here's your email on whatever I said, if they accept it, then it keeps going on. Otherwise, it stops. So the SharePoint list gets updated and it would stop if they said no. But if they said yes, then it goes through and it looks for who's the final approver. And the final approver would be the manager. And the manager then can say yes or no. Then they make a decision and then SharePoint gets updated accordingly. And the slides would look similar to what you see here on the screen. So we have all of this broken out into all these different sections. They work the same way. The difference is it just goes from the requester to the pre-approver, and then it keeps going down to the manager. In the parallel approval process, it would look kind of like this, where you could see all the different approvals side by side. So now we've laid down the foundation for setting all of these approvals and actions for you. You can make approvals for basically anything that you want to do. They could be approvals for expense reports, they could be approvals for invoices, they could be approvals for adding in new customers, they could be approvals for estimates, they could be approvals for time. It's endless, whatever you need. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm Belinda Allen. I had a great time talking with you today. It's been so much fun. I hope that we do this again next year. So I hope you learn as much in DynamicsCon as I do. Thanks.